Hey everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay, we're going to get started with Genesis chapter 29. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in the field. And behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone of the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well in the water, the sheep, and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where do you come from?" They said, "We are from Haran." He said to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" They said, "We know him." He said to them, "Is it well with him?" They said, "It is well. And see, Rachel his daughter is coming with the sheep." He said, "Behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go, pasture them." But they said, "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well, then we water the sheep." While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept out loud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, "Surely you are bone of my flesh." And he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love that he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you've done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban said, "It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also, in return for serving me another 7 years." Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. So Jacob went in to Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb. But Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben. For she said, because the Lord has looked upon my affliction. For now my husband will love me. She conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. Again she conceived and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will be attached to me, because I have bore him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she ceased bearing. Well, this is kind of an interesting story, this Genesis chapter 29, for those of you guys who just popped in here. Genesis chapter 29 starts to take us through the journey of Jacob falling in love and all the ups and downs of him falling in love and the difficulties. And we can see that on his way, he bumps into Rachel and he was super smitten with her. In fact, they exchanged a few words and he learned that Rachel was a shepherdess, and that kind of spoke to the fact that she's a woman who was busy doing the things that she's supposed to be doing, not lazy. You know, she was more of a person who was hardworking and she could make a potentially good helper. And then we see Jacob's reaction to Rachel was super sweet. Him describing the fact that he was family, her getting really excited, and her running off and telling her father. So you can see a woman going to go tell her father about a man was a pretty serious thing. So she was so excited about him. This meant that she wanted to be with him. It wasn't just that she was, chatting with her father. When a woman was telling her father about a man, it was for the purpose of settling down. So there was a lot of excitement around that. They had a lot of what looks like natural chemistry. Rachel was described as very beautiful. And so it gives us a sense as a woman how we could potentially approach finding love. It shows a woman here, Rachel, as prepared in terms of beauty. It talks about her having, basically good fitness, because running around chasing the sheep required her to have, a level of strength and fitness. It talks about her having beauty. That also means she's showing up, presenting herself well. She's not just throwing herself together and hoping for the best. She's probably putting herself together nicely as well. It also talks about her appearance in Genesis chapter 29, verse 17. It says, Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. So she had good form. I call that being well built. So she was a woman who probably was built nicely. So she was visually pleasing, but she was also busy doing the work of God. So she was taking care and tending to the sheep properly. So doing her family unit work the way she should be doing it. And so, rather than doing that and just being so busy that she's not looking around her, she was tending to her sheep, but she was doing that from a place where she did have her eyes open and she was available to catch someone's eye. So it's a great way of the Bible teaching us how to ensure that we're not missing opportunities, right? So she had an opportunity every time she left the house to potentially meet someone, find someone, and settle down. And so she's busy doing God's work. She was getting out the house. She was presenting herself well. She had good physique and a nice natural beauty, but also because she was doing a physical job, she had to be strong. And she wasn't just tending to the sheep and ignoring everything around her. She had good situational awareness, so that when she saw a gentleman that was of age who might be interested, she was able to, kind of receive him and in those moments show him that she had some interest. So, and that's how they began their conversation. So I think it gives us a little bit of how we can get involved with someone in the biblical way. Certainly, she didn't just move forward without her family's approval. She was looking at, as soon as she thought he might be someone who was of interest, she didn't start doing things on her own. The first thing she did was go back and run and tell her father. And I thought, like, wow, that's so opposite of how we handle things nowadays. But I find that nowadays we're very imperfect as people, and we have very imperfect families. So it becomes very difficult for us to do it exactly this way. But I do think that we could try to adopt some of it by having community. I think that's where community comes in. So, for example, if we have close friends in our community, if we have close friends or mentors within our church group, we may be able to consider, leveraging someone from our church group and saying, if I have someone who wants to come, connect with me and potentially settle down, would you be the ones to vet them alongside me? We could depend on our community to do things like that. So that's something that, although our society is very different now, we don't really have a lot of nuclear families with mom, dad, and child all in one household. We can take from that and say, how can my current community, my current mentors actually be used in a parental style where I could say, well, would one of you guys be interested in helping me vet someone, or, ask them a few questions, or just be that person that, shows my love interest, that someone in my family cares about how this ends up. I think more than just trying to find the right person, I think nowadays that could be helpful to kind of derail the wrong person. And here's a perfect example. Once upon a time, there was a gentleman that was interested in me, and I lived in another state, so I wasn't even in my current state. So he was considering flying out to come meet me. And I said, in this particular home, I have my parents here, and unlike my home in my other state. I was like, my parents are here, so would you be willing to meet my parents? And the first thought was there was not any interest in meeting my parents. And so I became very unsettled with the situation. Does that make sense? And he giggled, and he really wasn't interested in meeting my parents. And I thought, well, what are his intentions? Does that make any sense to you guys? You guys in the chat feel me on that? I was like, what are his intentions? Because I have good and pure intentions. So since this person's interested in me, and they've already said they were interested in things like settling down and marriage, and there were some light talks there, I figured surely you're flying in from out of state. Surely you should want to meet my family and basically be lightly vetted, right? So that's an opportunity to ensure that, based on an outside view, that our discernment is good, that there aren't any major concerns to be worried about. And so, yeah, there was no interest. There was no interest in being vetted or speaking to the parents. And so look at the difference in the two stories. Obviously, my situation didn't work out and I'm still single. But when you look at that, look at when she said she was excited and she wanted to bring this gentleman home. He was also excited to meet the family and go through that vetting process. So interesting as we go through this. So he goes and he meets Laban, and there was excitement initially, and it seemed like it would be a trusting relationship. Jacob ended up staying with Laban for a month because he was welcomed into the home, and things were looking good. And the marriage piece was starting to come together. But it was shortly thereafter that, upon deciding to be married to and engaged and married to Rachel, the younger, more beautiful daughter of the two, Laban actually switched the women at the wedding. And when he went to go lay down with his would-be wife, he realized the next morning that he was set up, and that the older sister, who happened to be less attractive and was not supposed to be his wife, that person was switched off. And he not only had he switched them off, but he also had intimate relations with her too. So we see that sneaky trick. And what's interesting is Jacob goes back to Laban and has that close discussion. And there's not much that Jacob could say, because after all, Jacob was the deceiver. We had just saw him deceive his brother in order to get the blessing. And his brother was the older one and he was the younger one, right? So that blessing kind of family line wise would have normally gone to the older one. But Jacob snuck and was trying to steal it. So the town people kind of knew that Jacob had a name for stealing the blessing and cutting around and doing some deceptive tricks. So when it came down to Jacob complaining about the switch at the wedding, at the honeymoon, he didn't really have any ground to stand on, because Laban was like, basically, yeah, in our town, we actually take care of the older daughter first. So it wasn't much that Jacob could actually say, except, I love Rachel and I'm willing to work for her again, And so, gosh, think about that. 7 years he worked for Rachel, didn't get her, and then he worked another 7 years for her. That is love in action. That is actually love in action. I mean, you can't say anything more than that. But when you see this, and then you kind of see how the women start getting competitive, they start fighting, and it goes back to this idea. We hear a lot about polygamy, and is it biblical? Is it a best practice? And we see how it turns out when we look at the story of Jacob. We also see how that turned out when we think about Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. And then we can also see how God's design was built when we think about Adam and Eve. What I would say about it is you can see in the design of Adam and Eve that God could have pulled out two women from two different ribs, and he could have made a man have three women right there on the front end, but he made one woman and one man, and later on God said to become one flesh. That's God's design, was one man and one woman. And even later on in the New Testament, we see God talking about the importance of leaders. I believe it's in the book of Timothy, maybe Timothy chapter 3, something like that. We see later on in the New Testament where God's talking about the importance of leaders being the husband of one wife. So, or overseers in that case, overseers of the church. So when we see this idea of like, what's God's perfect idea of marriage, the perfect idea would be one woman, one man in covenant forever. We even see Jesus talking to the Pharisees later on in the New Testament about that. When the Pharisees say, well, can people divorce? What is this story? And Jesus was speaking on it, and he says, well, because of the hardness of man's heart, yes, Moses was allowed to provide a bill for divorce. But Jesus says it wasn't that way from the beginning. So from the beginning, Adam and Eve, it was the idea is you get man and woman together, and that is a permanent covenant, and that it should never be broken, because marriage is supposed to mirror the relationship between Christ and the church. No matter how many times we make mistakes and sin, Jesus doesn't run from us and leave us or forsake us. He's right there waiting to receive us again. And so that's the interesting thing, is since marriage is supposed to be like our relationship with Christ and the church, when we see here marriage and we bring that to Genesis chapter 29 and we see Leah and Jacob and Rachel in this marriage, which started off with Leah desiring for Rachel, ending up with Leah, and then ending up waiting another 7 years to actually get access to Rachel. You can start to see at the end of Genesis chapter 29 the fights and the bickering that start to show up when you got two women and one man. You see them competing for his love and affection. We see Leah, who was the less attractive, less desirable, less favorable wife. We see her having baby after baby and just hoping that after this baby, he will love me. After this one will be attached. After this one, he'll fall for me. But at the very end, what I think it's a difficult thing to see this woman who already feels slighted. It's difficult to see that, but God, in his own way, lifted her head, lifted her up by making her fruitful and making her fruitful first. So she had many children. God opened the way for her to have many children as a way to bless her. But then what was interesting is in the midst of all the difficulty, when she's struggling and she's struggling to get that full love from her husband, in the midst of all that, the last thing that she says is she's worshiping. So in the midst of her worst moments, when she felt least attractive, least desirable, least loved by man, her response to all of that was worship to God, right? So Genesis chapter 29, verse 36. And she conceived again and bore a son and said, "This time I will praise the Lord." Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she ceased bearing. So these children between Rebecca and Leah, these are the future, the tribes of Judah. This is like so deep when you think about it. This woman who was, I don't know if anybody can relate to that, because a lot of people have this natural confidence, right? But this is a woman who, she didn't have that natural confidence. And whatever confidence she had was overshadowed by her sister. And then imagine your husband who you lays with your sister who's more beautiful. And when we take it all the way back to like our early years of maybe having bickering with our brothers and sisters, our siblings, and having those moments, imagine when you're already bickering and you feel some kind of way in your heart, only to realize at some point you're bickering over something, you feel self-conscious, and the person that you've given your heart to has their heart is for someone else. And that's just so tough when you think about it. And this is not like a couple of years. This is like her lifetime with this gentleman. That's tough. It's really, really, really tough. But her response to it is, I think, tells you a lot about her. Even though she goes back and forth fighting and bickering and jealousy and making this other sister jealous, and getting different. At some point they even get, if you look on, at some point they're even getting the servants to have kids at some point, right? Later on. But in all of that, all those games that they were playing, the very last thing that she said is like, in the midst of this where I feel like I'm not getting my way, I'm gonna worship. And I think that's a word for all of us, because things come and they go. We don't always get our way. I mean, a lot of times we desire things and we ask God for things, and God is answering in his own time and when we are ready. And sometimes he's preparing us. Other times he's telling us no, or not right now, or we're not ready. But what we do and how we respond to our worst moments, to the moments where we're not getting what we want, I think that's really important to think about, how we respond when we're not getting what we want and desire. That tells us a lot right there, right? That even tells us a lot when we think about regular human relationships. We might be having a great relationship with someone, but let that other individual not get what they were hoping to get, and then let's see their character in those moments. Let's let our partner see our character when we're not getting our way. Let's see if our flesh starts to sneak up on us. But in her lowest moment, she was ready and willing and able to praise God. And so I think I think Leah's response to her challenging time was something that we can all strive for. And we can get there actually by getting in our word. I think there's something about our secret time with God and getting in our word that can really help us to get to a place where, in the midst of a trial, that rather than curse God or speak negative things over ourselves or feel in the depths of despair and go into a deep, deep, dark depression, can we, in that moment, replace all of that with time with Jesus? And can we replace it with worshiping? Can we replace it with that? And in praising God and worshiping, can we get the reset to move forward on a different path from that? But that's what I would say. It's a real story around that, and it's also a real story around about this sneakiness that kind of like you could see all the sneakiness that Jacob had at some point. The word got out that that was his character, and so when Laban had an opportunity to be sneaky with him, kind of that, you know, Jacob's reputation had already preceded him a bit. So Laban kind of threw that in his face on some level. He was kind of like, well, over here in these parts, we make sure the oldest is taken care of first. And that was kind of a shot at Jacob because Jacob was the youngest and he snatched his blessing. So it was a shot at Jacob for Laban to say, hey, we take care of the older first over here in this part of town. So what was Jacob going to say other than accept it and then say, I would like to work for Rachel again. I would like to work another 7 years. And so the first 7 years, he talks about it going by so quickly because he's just so excited for his bride. But I got to tell you, that second 7 years, you got to wonder, was he as amped up and excited for the second 7 years of work as he was the first 7 years? But yet and still, you see, he was pushing to be blessed with what he wanted. So, gosh, it makes you think about love nowadays, and you know, can we get back there is what I would wonder. Can we ever get back to a love that is so deep that someone is willing to be self-sacrificial in order to receive that love, and someone that's willing to go to the home of your father in order to be vetted, in order to receive that love? Those are things that were happening, it says, before he went in her. So, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if society adjusted and we put meeting the family first or negotiating for the future first before the physical acts? Wow, what kind of amazing endings could we have if we switched that up a little bit? But, you know, all in due time. We'll see how it all turns out. But that was Genesis chapter 29. Very interesting. Almost like a soap opera, I would say this one was. But join me next time when we hit up the next chapter, when we get to Genesis chapter 30 next. So see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.